All right, it looks like we are live. I am wondering, I'm trying to look, you guys, because I'm seeing some issues with Be Live lately. So I am just trying to give it a minute to see if it even shows that it's starting, and I don't think it is showing. So I may abandon Be Live here pretty shortly. It's great when it works, not so great when it doesn't work. And give me a shout out if you can. Give me a shout out if you can hear me. Um, nope, it started a whole new stream, didn't it? That is really frustrating. That is really frustrating. Well, I'm going to be commenting on that to Be Live tonight. All right, let's get started because you guys will find me and I will get a chance to deal with this part later. Tonight, you think one of these days I'm going to figure out how to do my PowerPoints, but tonight we're going to talk about understanding threshold. This is really an important topic to me. This is, for me, I always talk about, if you train with me, I'm always talking about communicating with clarity. That's really the key thing for me, is that we need to always be clear to the dog, which means as a human, we need to be thinking about things a little bit, right? We need to think about how the dog's perceiving it, what we're doing and stuff. So communicating with clarity. This part is understanding threshold. And let's talk about what threshold is. According to Webster, threshold is the point at which a physiological or psychological effect begins to be produced. So the point at which a physiological or psychological effect begins to be produced, not way past the point, not after, uh, not when you're seeing a full-on reactive piece with the dog or person for that matter, but the very point at which the effect begins to be produced. So let's talk about what that means to me, and I want to hear from you guys. Like, what does it mean to you guys? Like, what do you think of when you think of threshold? Because I want to hear what you guys are thinking about, and how many of you guys are paying attention to threshold. And I don't just mean when a reactive dog gets like super reactive. This is not just about reactive dogs. This is about any training, any time. Okay. So it's really important. We're going to talk about the importance of it in just a second, but let's talk first about really understanding where threshold is and what it isn't. So it is not, what it is it is the physical distance between the dog and the stressor, right? And it's the amount of distance before you start having that reaction. That is certainly one example. I'm going to come back to this example in a minute. It could also be time. Threshold can be about time. I need the dog to hold a sit for a while or a look for a while. So where is that time? The dog starts to get slightly uncomfortable, body shifts. The way I like to explain threshold to people is, because I think innately we all know it, but let's talk about it and put it into words. So if you think about a football field, right? Just a football field, 100-yard football field, and you and your dog are at one end of the field, and let's just say it's another dog. And by the way, threshold does not mean reactivity, although it is extremely important to understand to do good work with reactivity. It might mean over arousal. It might mean any number of things, but threshold, it might have nothing to do with any temperament issues. But for purposes of conversation, we're going to talk about it as though we have a reactive dog, because that's just sort of easier for people to imagine. So let's say we've got me and my reactive dog are at one end of the football field, and we have another nice neutral dog at the other end. So they're 100 yards away. And let's say my dog at 100 yards doesn't notice. All right, fair enough. We're under threshold for sure. And then the neutral dog starts moving towards us, and maybe they get to the 50-yard line, and my dog kind of looks up and is like, sort of notices them, but doesn't pay a lot of attention, but sort of starts keeping a little bit of an eye on him, right? Like glancing away, glancing away, glancing. And so then they keep coming and they come to like, say, the 45-yard line. And my dog sort of starts watching them, pretty strong interest now. And then you start seeing my dog maybe stiffen a little bit as the dog gets to the 40-yard line. And at the 35, my dog just pops off and goes reactive, right? And so often people say, oh, at the 35-yard line, that's the threshold. That's where he went over the threshold. Yes, that's true. That's where they went over threshold. But I don't think of threshold as a spot, as a single spot. I think of threshold as depending on what we're talking about the threshold. So my dog started noticing at 50 yards, but wasn't super uncomfortable. But at 45, my dog started showing me that he was uncomfortable. He started taking an awareness. He started posturing. The ears became erect. Everything started being a little bit stiff. So for me, I'm going to say the 45-yard mark is where my dog's threshold was, between that 50 and 45, right? That's when my dog started to begin to have a physiological reaction, not way deep into the physiological reaction. That's the 35-yard line and even the 40-yard line, but began to have that physiological reaction started for my dog in this example between the 50 and the 45-yard line. When we notice threshold at its earlier spots, we can do really, really good training on that. All right. We can do really good training on that when we notice it. But so often we don't notice it. We don't notice the dog's ears went up. They got a little stiff. They started showing a little bit too much interest. We kind of ignore that. And then we just keep going. And then we're like, oh my God, I never saw it coming. And I'm like, yeah, there's like 10 signals before that. So we really, really need to pay attention to threshold, which can be a range. We're on the outer limits of threshold and then the inner limits of threshold. All right. Also time, I want you guys to realize that time can be a stressor also, right? Like, let's say I'm asking my dog to hold a down stay and then they start seeing something. And I actually use this with the look a lot. I teach a lot of work with the look, and my dog will be looking at me because, right, what I do, I need to have really good focus. My dog will be like looking, I'm always trying to build that focus. And I'll be right to the edge of where I know he can be. I know he can do, let's say, a 30-second look, and I'm getting to that 25, 26. And you see him kind of, his body gets tight. He's sort of anticipating, is she going to pay me? Is she not going to pay me? Hey, what's going on? And he starts getting a little bit fidgety. Now I'm in that threshold zone. All right. And why is that important? Why is that important? The importance and of understanding threshold and it's the power of threshold. All right. It's really, really, really important. Threshold is where the real learning happens. All right. So if my dog isn't taking notice or isn't struggling just a little bit, it's just super easy. We're not necessarily learning. We might be building confidence, and there might be really good reasons to do that. I'm not saying that we always want every session to be right at threshold, but we need to find threshold fairly frequently in our training to get good focused training. I'm gonna have to change this up. Oh, that's not gonna work. Okay, so let's start with this. So it's where real learning happens, all right? So we need to really, really be able to identify. And then it's not that we want to make the dog fail. It's actually the opposite. Although a little of it can be important, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the goal is to show the dog, I've got to switch this out. The goal is to show the dog that they can succeed, right? That's where the big learning happens, okay? It's not that we fail or that we correct the dog. I'm not even talking about corrections. I'm really only talking about whatever methodology you train in, understanding the power threshold. And when we go right to the edge of it, we are probably going to fail sometimes, but we shouldn't fail more than 1 in 10, let's say. And why do I say like we're probably going to fail sometimes? Probably we're going to fail sometimes because we don't really know if we're not pushing the envelope a little bit. Our best learning happens right at the edge of the envelope. And sometimes we may push a little hard. It may be that he could have done it yesterday, but today he tipped over a little. There's more going on or whatever. I'm okay with a little bit of failure. I think it helps both the dog and the handler know how to do it, but it shouldn't be more than 10%. Okay? Shouldn't be more than 10%. 90% of your work needs to be finding threshold and being successful at threshold. Taking the dog right to the edge without going over, and making sure that you push that threshold. Why does it matter? I want you guys to think about, if you're learning your best learning, think about when you're learning something. Is it ever easy? Right? Like, it's just not. Like, learning is hard, like true learning, like when you're really understanding something, learning is hard. And I don't mean like we need to make learning hard, but what I mean is when we wrestle with concepts, then we start getting a little bit of a physiological response. We're reaching threshold, right? But we do our best learning. So if I want to learn math, let's say I want to be a math whiz, and I only do multiplication tables up to 10, 1 by 1, 2 by 2, 3 times 3, 4 times 4, right? I've been doing that since I was a little kid, right? We all have. I'm going to assume that that's not going to be super stressful for me at all. Like, it's going to be like easy peasy. Like, it's nothing for me. I'm never going to touch my threshold with trying to do 10 by 10, 10 times 10, or 9 times 9, or 8 times 8, or 7 times 7. That's not hard for me. It's not hard for most of us. We all had to memorize those tables when we were young. And I'm not learning anything. I may be doing math, but I'm not actually learning anything. Now, if you hand me an algebraic equation, and I'm going to assume that you've actually given me some instruction on how to do it, but I'm looking at it and I'm not quite sure, and I'm looking at it and I'm puzzling it, and I'm trying to figure out a squared plus b squared equals c, and I'm trying to figure out the things. I'm struggling a little bit. That's threshold, guys. That's threshold. But once I figure out the right answer, I've learned. Learning happens at threshold. Keep that in mind. If you never push your training, and so often what people do is they go out and they go through the motions of training, and they do some training, they do a little of this and a little of that and a little of that, and never ever push their threshold. And then suddenly they're out and they're like, I'm going to go to a dog event, or I'm going to go to whatever. I'm going to go for a walk in my neighborhood. And suddenly their dog, who hasn't been exposed to threshold, suddenly goes over threshold, because he's like, whoa, what happened? I don't know how to handle myself there. And then people are like, I don't know what happened. And it's like, well, we didn't teach our dogs fully. So if we want to teach our dogs fully, we really, really, really need to understand this concept about threshold. And we need to really work hard to find thresholds and to work within it. And remember what I said, 90% of it has to be positive, at least. And by positive, I'm not even talking about positive or pressure. I'm talking about 90% of it has to be successful. The dog needs to be successful. The dog needs to struggle a little and be successful. Because think about it, if I'm trying to do that math and I didn't get good enough instruction that I could solve the problem, and every single time I failed the problem, that's no good for my confidence and my learning, right? So we can't do that. We need to keep our dog successful, but we need to push that envelope a little bit. And it's okay for once in a while to fail. Like, some people are afraid of ever failing, and so they never push threshold very far. And then suddenly their dog goes over threshold and they don't know what to do. It's okay to fail, but not more than 10% of the time. All right. So do the best you can to stay there. Now, if we're going to train at threshold, there's a couple of things we need to make sure that we have to do to be successful. We need to change the reward frequency and the reward value. So just think about it again. If you're learning something, if every time I got 2 + 2 right, I got an M&M, and I'm like, cool. And I'm popping M&Ms like they're candy. They are candy, right? I'm popping them in. I'm like, this is cool. I can do these math problems all day long. And then suddenly I went and I did something hard, like that algebra problem that I was trying to do. And I worked really, really hard, and somebody handed me an M&M. I'd be like, hey, I'm going to go back to doing 2 times 2 and 3 times 3, because that's way easier. I'm not even going to try on this hard stuff anymore, right? So when we work at threshold, which is very, very important for our learning for the dogs, for learning for us, when we work at threshold, it is really important that we reward better. We reward better than we do, and for something the dog knows really well. So I'm going to look at both frequency of my reward or value of my reward. So if I make, as an example, I'm doing a lot of work with tracking with Junior right now. I'm going to be pushing out some hard tracks. when I do that, I do one of two things. I either have more of his food there, or what I like to do is I like to go up in food. I go to tri-tip, I get tri-tip trimmings from places, right? And I save them and I freeze them. And most of the time we track for like rollover or Lucy's. That's one of his favorite. He loves Lucy's. The treats are super easy. I've got them with me all the time. Those are his favorites. But like, come on, guys, steak trimmings or tri-tip trimmings, like that's pretty good. So if I've asked him to go through a really difficult section of track, I'm going to make sure that I've got some of that higher value stuff so that he goes, oh, that was hard, but oh man, that is awesome. Right? That's how I want my dog feeling about training. That was hard, but that reward was awesome and it's totally worth it. So I really, really, really want to make sure that I am increasing that reward value. The other thing that I might be doing is frequency. It might be the same reward. In my example with the dog reactivity, my example would be that I'm trying to think about what I wanted to say. Sorry, guys, I got distracted. So my example would be that as the dog got closer, I might pay more. If I'm paying for a look, if I'm paying for something like that, I'm going to be like, pay a little bit, good. And I actually wouldn't do it for a look for various reasons on my own training program. But if I was going to do that, what I would do is, let's say I'm paying for a sit stay and just generally autofocus. And my dog's looking at me and I'm paying. And I know my dog can handle autofocus to me for quite a while. And something that is very enticing to them gets closer and closer. The closer they get, the more I'm going to pay. Okay. See how that works? The closer I get, the more I'm going to pay. So I'm going to increase the reward frequency for that. And then when it backs off, I'm going to pay a little bit less for that same behavior. Okay. All right. So figure out what your dog's threshold is on whatever it is you're working on. And then you want to make sure that you increase reward frequency, reward value, and remember to keep it successful 90% of the time. Just because I'm saying it's okay to fail a little bit, that's because if you're really pushing threshold well, you're more likely to fail a little bit. Sometimes it's hard to get that experience to reach the edge. So I don't hold dogs to 100% accountability. I can't hold people to 100% accountability, but try to get that 90%. All right. Okay, guys, I will let you guys go and I will see you later. I didn't even talk about the cool stuff we have coming up, but that's for next week. So I've got some cool things going on next week. Okay. All right. Bye, guys.